Hello, thank you very much for coming and holding this forum. I come to you as a former teacher. I only taught a year, but I was also a parent of a child in school a few years ago, so I don't have to deal with the new changes in Common Core directly, but also as a former school board member. And about 15 years ago, the regents came out with new so-called higher standards. And I looked at those standards, and they seemed very different from what I had been taught back in Teachers College. And they seemed very different from what I thought education should be. And I look at the Common Core standards, and I'm getting the same impression. And the issue that I'm seeing is, I think we've shifted the focus of public education from transferring a body of knowledge that most people can agree upon should go from the older generation to the younger generation so they don't have to reinvent the wheel, to performance. What's the problem with that? Well, knowledge is something that's easy to identify and easy to objectively assess. Performance, however, is subjective to judge, and I think that's where we're running into trouble. When we look at these new standards, to me anyway, they seem to put the emphasis on performance. What makes up performance? Knowledge is a part of that, for sure. But you have other things that confound what can be taught in school. You've got maturity. I think that's probably the big one for a lot of people. You have genetic background. You have disabilities. You have family background, socioeconomic status, and so on. There are many different things. If we're trying to shoehorn our children into all attaining a certain level of performance, it's like asking me to play championship basketball. I'm just not going to do it. And that's where I think a lot of frustration a lot of the parents that complain about what's going on now with their children, that's where the frustration is coming from. We're trying to make the children all perform alike. It's not doable. And it sort of really, it makes you wonder, are we really testing now what the children are learning in school? Or are we just sorting them into subjective groups for perhaps that workforce of the future? I don't know what the answer is, but I think the emphasis on performance really needs to be looked at very carefully. I think it would be much better if we agreed on certain things that we think all children should know and gear our standards and our assessments on those things, on knowledge. Performance will come when a child is ready for it. Anyway, that's all I had to say.
I think it's interesting. I've seen some of the things that you've spoken about. And I just have a question for you is I know that a big issue that we keep talking about, and when you're talking about performance and what standard, are we trying to create, for lack of a better word, a lot of Bill Gates is out there, people that I don't even know if he's a math science person, but I know we've talked about the STEM issue and how we're going to take all our kids and we're going to make them all STEM ready so that our society is going to be this great, group of students that are great at science, technology, and math. How is that possible? Because I know with me, I got to a point in math where I said, okay, it's over for me. I'm better at something else. And I know my brother was like a super genius at math. It just was his strength. And I just don't, I think that you touch on something that's really profound here. How do we get that back to that individual standard as opposed to this, like, where are we going with this?
Well, I guess, what do you think? I think if you put the emphasis on knowledge, right, that's the starting point. I was a science major. My major was earth science. Some people thought, well, that's kind of a boring subject. I loved it. I thought it was great. But what it was is that I had the hunger to learn more about the world around me. That's knowledge. That's a hunger for knowledge. And that hunger for knowledge is in every student. Some students gravitate more to one subject than another. But I think all students want knowledge. Performance, however, is something entirely different. And I looked at the changes in the earth science curriculum between the time I took earth science 50 years ago and when my son took it. like about 10 years ago. And the emphasis with him was group activities, lots of labs. I looked at his textbook, and it read like something I had in graduate school, phase diagrams for magma and different minerals precipitating out at different temperatures and so on. I thought, this wasn't appropriate for high school. But it also turned the subject that for me was very exciting and interesting into a chore. And I think that's what's happened, because we expect these children to do things. You have to do so many labs now to be able to graduate. I don't think that's the point.
Right, you're getting your ticket punched for something else. Right?
Give them something to know, and those that are interested in the subject will go on to bigger and better things. But I think when you turn everything into drudgery, that's why we don't have the STEM majors, I think, that we need. We've made it so much work for them, and work in a bad way, where it's busy work, not work where they're actually learning something. I think that's why we don't have the science majors that we used to have and that we need to have.
Great, thank you.
Can I just mention one thing, because you brought it up in terms of sorting the students and categories, labeling. Somebody, I think, earlier stated. It was interesting back about a month ago, I guess, when we had one of our hearings on Long Island. We had a woman come up and testify who had been educated in China as a child. And she came there not as a parent, not as a teacher, but because she was scared that what she was seeing here was going to become what she had basically said she had escaped from there, and feeling like as a young child you were just getting, sorted out, and okay, you're not a student, you're going to, be over here. We'll concentrate on this minute few that we think can go, to the moon, and everybody else, fine, wherever you end up is fine, but that's not going to be our focus. And she had a real concern with that, and some of our staff actually beforehand were talking to her, and she's saying, I don't know if I want to, speak or whatever, and they implored her to please get up and tell that story, because I thought it was a very moving message to think that here's somebody who was educated in one of these places that were supposedly lagging so far behind, and she was coming to heed the warning to us. Don't go there.
And the other thing too is, another realization that I just had was talking about spitting out the answer. A couple of people just said it. Students learn to spit out the answer. Here's the answer. And one of the things that I laugh the most about in my practice in law is I'll read like the law spelled out, and they'll say, here's the law, and I always wind up asking the question, that's nice, but what does that mean? Okay? And, there were times where I'd argue in court, and I'd have two cases back to back, and I would walk up to a judge and argue that this law meant this. And he'd sit there, and I'd get his attention, and I explained to him why it meant that. And after that case was done, I'd get up with almost the same exact case and argue that this law meant that, And he'd go, wait a minute, didn't you just argue the complete opposite 2 minutes ago? And I'd say, well, that's a different case, Judge. But we're getting away from people sitting there and asking, kids delving into it, and just give us the answer and move along. Okay, let's not discuss the answer. Let's not discuss how we got there. So, when you're talking about your son's book and stuff, it's where you have the love for science, he's just regurgitating what they want him to say.
I kind of get the impression that maybe you're not seeing the value in rote learning.
Okay.
But I think there is value in rote learning, because at some point, it's something that you will recall in the future when you may need it. You might not know now or at the time that you're learning when you're going to need that, but you will at some point recall that lesson at some point in the future. You make your arguments to the judge with regard to what a particular law means, but you make your arguments based on facts in each case. Unless you know the facts ahead of time, you can't make an argument. And this is what upsets me when I hear people talking about, oh, well, we're going to teach kids to think critically. How can you teach kids to think critically when you haven't given them any knowledge to critically think about? That's the point. We're withholding so much knowledge now from these kids and having them spend all their time doing stuff that they come out of school not really knowing what their parents and grandparents learned. And that's a serious threat, I think, to the future of this country.
Yeah, I think we agree with each other in a way, because I want the kids to be able to look at what we're teaching them and to actually internalize it and be able to ask those questions on, okay, why is it like that? Why does it, what does that word mean? Okay, because that's what I do a lot, Plus, I like to screw around with the judge when he's up on the bench. But,
Wait, I got to warn you, Al, he's a judge.
Well, there you go. Then you know guys like me when I come up.
See, he's ready for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.